In the first century, Corinth had totally dwarfed Athens as the most dominant city in Greece. And Corinth rose to power because of several different elements or factors. One factor that contributed to the strength of Corinth was this rock that we're standing on. This is the Corinth. The main city is down below, and this monolith rose 1,800 feet into the air. And what this provided was a place of refuge, sanctuary, security, whenever war swept through this area. It made your city defensible and your existence survivable in times of conflict. A second factor that really contributed to the growth of Corinth was that Corinth controlled two harbors. One harbor on the Corinthian Gulf led into the Adriatic Sea. The other harbor on the Saronic Gulf led into the Aegean Sea. And this allowed Corinth to become a trade center for trade goods that passed east and west through this area. A third thing that contributed was that down here a few miles away on the coast were the prestigious Isthmian Games. These Olympic-style games were held every 2 years, and athletes and spectators flocked here from throughout the Greek and Roman world to watch these important athletic competitions. A fourth factor, though, that helped Corinth to thrive was agriculture. I mean, standing up here on the Corinth, any direction you look, you see fields and vineyards and orchards. And this was important because for a city to thrive, you needed groceries. I mean, you needed food, you needed crops. And the Apostle Paul writes to believers living here. And unfortunately, believers who were embroiled in conflict, arguing over status. And so in order to correct this status-seeking mindset, the Apostle Paul compares himself to a certain occupation. To what will the great Apostle Paul liken himself? He compares himself to a farmer, just a farmer, whose job it is to plant seeds in a field. And he uses this imagery of farming in order to remind the Corinthians of the simplicity and the humility of the culture of the cross.
Well, good morning and welcome to the month of November. And those of you worshiping with us at our other campuses, I'm just so pleased that we get to hang out today for this third installment of this significant series of conversations around this topic, the culture of the cross. I'm outbound for the next couple weekends, and Pastor Aaron Buer gets to take part 4 and part 5. So Aaron will be opening the scriptures for us the next 2 weekends. Chris and I are headed to Czech Republic and then Slovakia. I speak at 3 different conferences, 2 in Czech Republic, and 1 in Slovakia. And here in the States, we're just bombarded with options, conferences and resources and people pouring into us and stuff. And there are parts of the world like Central Europe where there is just not a lot of input, resource, and people pouring into you. And so it really is a privilege for our ministry to be able to pour into some church leaders over there. So that's what's up over the next couple weeks. And as we begin the third conversation together, I'm going to show you a letter of the alphabet, and I would like you to respond with whatever it is that you feel when you see this letter of the alphabet. Now, I want you to respond at our campuses as well, all right? So you ready? You understand your assignment? You're going to see a letter of the alphabet, and I need you to emote with whatever you experience. Okay, here's the letter of the alphabet. Oh, all right. Such from church people. Another letter of the alphabet. Let's try an S, see if we do any better with that. All right. Any of you connected to Cornerstone University? Yeah. Any of you from Calvin? All right. Our cousins to the west at Hope? We are from hope and we are subdued. So, all right, one last letter of the alphabet, just. Okay, now, 3 some years ago, Chris and I were down at Van Andel Arena for a concert. It was Paul McCartney, right? It was in Grand Rapids. And there were different people that held signs up out in the audience at Van Andel. And he had his people go out and grab people with different creative signs, haul them up on the stage. And there's one point where he has this guy next to him that must have had a great sign. And Paul McCartney has the mic and he says, "So, where are you from?" And the guy says, "Ohio." And immediately there was this. And so McCartney immediately realizes that he has wandered into some kind of regional rivalry, and he looks at the guy and says, "Well, at least you have your health," you know. So now, college rivalries, and I'm so sorry that I didn't get to all of you. We do have to open the Bible sooner or later today. But college rivalries, all good fun, all good fun. We're talking about, basketball and football. But rivalries, let's say, within a church, between people, between personalities, and over issues, can be awful and ugly. That's exactly what was happening with the rivalries in the city of Corinth. It's about 50 AD. The Apostle Paul arrives in Corinth, spends a year and a half of his life growing a Jesus community, telling the story of the crucified, resurrected Jesus and forming a Jesus community in Corinth. After a year and a half, he moves on. His next mission is in Ephesus, where he will spend 3 years of his life. And while Paul is in Ephesus, he starts to hear rumblings, rumors that all is not well back in Corinth. That the believers that he's left behind there are embroiled in conflict, quarrels, inter-church rivalries. And so right out of the gate in his letter, 1 Corinthians, he hits this right out of the gate, where in chapter 1 he writes, "My brothers and sisters, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. It's not going well." And then he follows this up in verse 12 by saying, "Well, what I mean is this. One of you says, 'I follow Paul.' Another, 'I follow Apollos.' Another, 'I follow Cephas.'" Cephas is another name for Peter, Jesus' disciple Peter. "And others are saying, 'I follow Christ.'" Now, you gotta understand that back in the first century, there were no large church buildings. There weren't church buildings for a couple hundred years. And so churches would meet usually in someone's house. Someone had a large enough house to have a courtyard and a place where, say, 20, 30, 40 people could gather. And so if the Jesus movement was growing in a city, you needed a bunch of those. And apparently this is what was happening in the city of Corinth. One group is saying, "Well, we follow Paul." Another one's saying, "Well, we follow Apollos." That was a teacher that arrived after Paul. Some saying, no. Our allegiance is to Peter. And others saying, "Well, we follow Christ." Do you know which one of those houses was most superior? That's what they were arguing about. It wasn't simply an issue of theology. We like Paul's teaching. No, we like Peter's teaching. What we're talking here is status. Our leader's better than your leader, so our group's better than your group, so I'm better than you. What has happened in Corinth is that there's just this undercurrent of who's significant and who isn't, who counts and who doesn't, who's in and who's out, who matters and who doesn't matter. And the Apostle Paul, when he was in Corinth establishing this church, his main message was about the crucified Jesus, God coming to us in weakness and humility and sacrifice, the image of God on a cross. And so it's like Paul is like going, "You gotta be kidding me. Have you forgotten that down is up? Have you forgotten that the power and the presence of God are unleashed when we come in humbly and not with arrogant self-superiority?" And so in his first letter to the Corinthians, he's got to go after this. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul unpacks three different images, three different word pictures to help get his spiritual children in Corinth back on track. Now, these words were originally written to the church of Corinth. These so apply to the church of Grand Rapids. These were written to a group of believers. These three images were presented to a group of believers 2,000 years ago. They are so real for us today. So we get to explore these three images today. If this is like your second week at Ada Bible Church, and if you think you're coming back a third, these three images are critical. If you kind of look around and go, so what is this thing? There's church services and there's serving opportunities and there's programs, but what is this? I think these three images do as good a job as anything else at describing who we are to be in relationship to each other. And a whole lot of you, you're way beyond being here your second week. I mean, some of you have been here like 20 years. Hey, these three images that we look at today are a phenomenal reminder. These three images ground us, and these three images guide us in just remembering what this thing is supposed to be. Paul uses these three images to waken us to remember what it is to be part of the culture of the cross. So if you have a journal with you, I'd love for you to find the verses that we're looking at today. It's like, I think it's like page 47. There's the text from 1 Corinthians 3 and then space to write. If you don't have one of these, I'd love for you to snag one of these on the way out the door today and bring it with you. Just a great place to take notes. Three images. Image number one is God's field. God's field. Just play along. Can you say the two words with me? Ready? God's field. Listen to what Paul writes into this situation of church conflict. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 5, he says, what after all? What after all is Apollos, this other guy? And what is Paul? Like, who am I? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. What's Apollos and who am I? And the word he uses here is servants, not superstars, not rock stars, not celebrities, just servants. And to each to whom the Lord has given a task. It's like we're just servants doing chores. And then comes the field part, the planting imagery, where Paul says this, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been what? God has been what? Making it grow. And so he uses farming imagery here. And he says, my role was Paul did what Paul planted, and then Apollos watered, but God makes it grow. So just, yes, we have some potting soil here, just a little packet of seeds. Lettuce happens to be, dig a little hole, lettuce covered up, dig a little hole, lettuce covered up, dig a little hole, lettuce covered up, and you go, done. And you go, no, dude, you better get some water on that, or that's never gonna make it. Paul said, that wasn't my job. I had one task, I had one role, but my job was to work cooperatively, humbly and cooperatively with other people. So I threw the seed on the ground, I planted it in the soil. Apollos is not a competitor. Apollos is a coworker. I planted, Apollos watered, but once the seed is in the ground and once it's watered, lettuce, come forth. He says, we can't make it grow. We don't have the power to make it grow. There are forces outside of us. We can't bring the sun. We're not in charge of the nutrients in the soil. I plant, Apollos watered. How was that last part? But what? God makes it grow. Do you realize how humble this is? We're talking the Apostle Paul here. And he goes, we're just farmers. I plant, Apollos watered, God makes it grow. The next verse, I think it's verse 7, is where he goes, so neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes it grow. it's like a tone of humble servanthood just flows. It's an undercurrent through this entire section. I don't know about you, but I can think of better metaphors for ministry than people working out in a field. Okay, it's an August day. Mom and dad pile kids back of the car. They got the swimmies, they got the little plastic buckets and the shovels, drive out to Lake Michigan. They take Lake Michigan Drive. They go past Standale, past Grand Valley State University on the left, and then they come to the fields. It's 9:30 in the morning, and they look out, and there are people out there working the fields. They get out to Lake Michigan, they go to a state park, they haul all the stuff down to the beach, the swimmies, the beach stuff, the cooler. Kids play out there for like 3-4 hours. They drag everything back up to the parking lot, pile in the car. The kids cash out before the car is out of the driveway of the state park. Everyone's tired, and they drive back toward Allendale, and they look out and say, they're still out there, 3:30 in the afternoon. Paul goes, that's us. That's us. I don't know about you, but I can come up with more flattering images for ministry. He says, no, listen, you're God's field, and we're just workers in God's field. That's his imagery. A bookmark that we've distributed, and we got a bunch of these still available. What we've done is we've taken the habits of love from 1 Corinthians 13. You know that one that's read at weddings? Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. There's like 15 different habits of love. We've broken them down so that someone can take a couple of them each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and just kind of read it in the morning to say, okay, that's those two. Love is patient, love is kind, that's my focus today. And in the evening, kind of look at it, before you drift off. Can I show you Tuesday and can I show you Wednesday? It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. Read those out loud with me. Ready? Does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking. That comes in chapter 13, but already in chapter 3, Paul is building this case for does not boast, is not proud, is not self-seeking in the way he presents himself in cooperative work with other church leaders. It's a beautiful picture. 2 words, God's field. 2 words, God's field. It's a beautiful image to enter your mind when some weekend you walk into church and someone greets you at a door for a service. Just remember, this is God's field. This is a place, it's a place where he grows us. God's field. Little groups in our Discovery Village children's ministry, whether it's 4-year-olds or 4th graders, if you are a volunteer in Discovery Village, I'm telling you, an image to get in your mind before you go in and serve our kids is just, this is 2 words. What? This is God's field. God's field. Hundreds of volunteers, literally, that work with our middle schoolers and high schoolers. Just remember, this is what? 2 words. This is God's field. So many of you are in a small group, a circle of people where you learn each other's names, or you have an opportunity to talk about the growth challenges that are in front of you. As you enter a small group environment, 2 words could come to mind. What are they? They're God's field. This is the first image that the Apostle Paul uses for a church in crisis, the church of Corinth. Saying, man, what is this thing about? What is this thing about? Image number 1 is God's field, and this is how he wraps up in verse 9. And you are God's field, you are God's building. It's a change of metaphors. Image number 2. God's building. God's building. So we switch from being a farmer to being a subcontractor, all right? We've moved from being farming to construction work. Notice Paul's words where he says, by the grace God has given me, I had a certain job, and that job was to lay this is important, lay a foundation. But then he takes off after a year and a half. as a wise builder, and someone else is now building on top of the foundation. So I came to town, I was in Corinth a year and a half. My job was to get the foundation built, laid. Then he takes off, and now other people are building on top of his foundation. So just an image here, Paul is responsible for this. Other servants, individuals, leaders, participants are building this. And this is what Paul's gonna say. You be careful how you build. Be careful how you build. Now, while Paul was responsible for laying the foundation, Paul, was not the foundation. Check out what comes next. He says, but each of you should what? Should build with care. Be careful how you build. For no one can lay a foundation other than one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. So while Paul was responsible for laying the foundation of the church wasn't Paul, the foundation of the church was Christ. And so look at it this way, Jesus as the foundation. You're going, it's wonderful, we're in a church, Jesus is the foundation, I get it. This isn't Jesus as an idea. This isn't Jesus as a cliche. This isn't Jesus as a logo. When Paul talks about the Christ, he talks about God coming to us in weakness, humility, and sacrifice. See, when Paul talks about Jesus, it's not just a concept or a logo, it's how Jesus came. The foundation that Paul was responsible for building was a foundation of Christ in weakness, Christ in humility, Christ in sacrifice. He goes on to another mission. Now other individuals are leading these house churches, and his instruction to them is this: be careful how you build. Because it is possible to do the work of Christ without doing it in the way of Christ. It's possible to have a holy cause, but not go about it in a holy way. Be careful how you build, because it's possible to start with the Christ who came in weakness, humility, and sacrifice, and build in a way that's hostile, proud, envious, and filled with rivalry, which is exactly what was going on in Corinth. And they would claim to be doing the work of Christ. And he goes, yeah, it might be the work of Christ, but it's not the way of Christ. Be careful how you build, be careful how you build, be careful how you build. Like some of you are building a family. How long you guys been going out? Oh, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. You think this could be headed toward engagement? Yeah, I think it could be. So maybe a wedding out there, yeah. Not always, but often following, a husband-wife thing, kids. You could find yourself in the process of building a family. Listen, be careful how you build. I say, question, is this a Christian marriage? It's Christian-ish. What do you mean by, yeah, she's a professing believer. I'm a professing believer. He's a professing believer. Let's go back to the image if we can, Fred. It's possible to receive the message of Jesus, who came for us in weakness, humility, and sacrifice, and then proceed to build with hostility, pride, envy, and rivalry. Are you with me on this? Listen, be careful how you, it's possible to be a professing Christian, and yet everything about our relationships in a family are unchrist. Be careful how you build. Now, I know for a fact that some of you not only had arguments, but this very morning on the way to church, and they end it at our doors. And you go, oh, shame and guilt. No, growth. My word to you in learning the way of Christ is love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, does not boast, it is not proud, it is not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It does not keep record of wrongs. Does not delight when someone falls, does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. This type of love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. This, my friend, is a journey. What we're talking about here is nothing less than the total renovation of your imagination. That's why we're asking you to circle back to this day after day after day, because none of us grasp this in a week. What we're talking about here is renewing the mind and renewing the heart. And day by day and month by month and year by year, conforming our lives more to the culture of the cross and the way of the Christ. Be careful how you build. Be careful how you build. What are you building? Some of you wouldn't say a family. Some of you would be saying a friend group. It is possible for even people who identify with Christ, who call themselves believers, to conduct relationships on who's in, who's out, who's important, who's not important, who matters, who doesn't matter, who counts, who doesn't count. And this, my friends, happens in a Christian school. It happens at a Christian camp. It happens in a church youth group. And it can happen in a faith-based nonprofit. And Paul's just saying, man, God is not for arrogant self-interest. Down is up. The power and the presence of God are unleashed in humble servanthood. He tells the group in Corinth that's fracturing and splintering, be careful how you build, be careful how you build. And this wasn't written to a family, and it wasn't written to a friend group. It was written to a church community. And he just had to remind them that it's possible to do the work of Christ, but when it's not done in the way of Christ, we can expect that our results will go up in smoke, that they will be short-lived, and that they will be unrewarded. The imagery that he's about to use here is he changes the building metaphor a little bit, is about our work, your life's ministry, whatever that happens to be, getting tested to see what's really there in action and attitude. So follow this with me. It gets hot. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's what? Each person's work. This is not the testing of your soul. This is the testing of your labor, of your work. And so he does this thing here where he says, okay, let's talk about different building materials. And he throws out like 6 different types of building materials. Gold, silver, precious stones, and then some wood, and then some hay, and then some straw. All right, and he says, so imagine those things passing through fire. So these are the 6 building materials. You would find this in the passage of scripture: gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, straw. So imagine taking an old school grill, grabbing a bag of briquettes, dropping them in, baptizing the whole thing in a bunch of lighter fluid, lighting the thing, the coals get red hot, and then you toss in some silver coins, you toss in some gold coins, you take all of those precious jewels that are in your attic, you throw those in, you have those, don't you? You throw those in too, and then also throw in a few blocks of wood, throw in little bundles of straw, hey, close the lid on the thing, walk away for half an hour, and then come back and open the lid and see what's there. And you go, where did the wood go? I distinctly remember throwing it in. Where's my straw? Where's my hay? He says, the difference in these is that 3 of them have a tendency to resist heat, and 3 of these are highly combustible. All he's saying here is this, man, be careful how you build, be careful how you build. Because some of us, the stuff that we're building is gonna go up in smoke, and it's gonna go unrewarded. It's just gonna go very, very short-lived. Be careful how you build. And we read that part and we go, my goodness, this is intense. It is intense. And the reason their spiritual father, the Apostle Paul, is getting so intense because what they're building, what we are building, isn't a strip mall. And what we are building isn't a furniture warehouse. And what we are building isn't a little shed in the backyard to park our riding mower in. What we are building is God's temple. God's field, God's building, God's temple. Very next verse in the passage, verse 16. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells where? Out there in your middle, in your midst. Now, the word you here is plural. I'm from north of the Mason-Dixon line, but don't you know that y'all are the temple of God? It's a collective term. It's not just that I am the temple of God, but that the group gathered in its various forms is the temple. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit lives around and between and above you? Now, if you're in the first century and you come at this from a Greek or Roman worldview, this is a mind bender. This is so strange because temples were everywhere and you could see them and you knew who dwelled in them. This right here is the skyline of Athens. This hill right here is the Acropolis. And crowning the Acropolis is this building here that many of you would recognize as the Parthenon. Now, what is the Parthenon? The Parthenon wasn't a courthouse. The Parthenon wasn't a judicial building. Crowning the Acropolis was a temple to the goddess Athena. And Athena's job was to protect the city of Athens, named after Athena. So here's the question. Who dwells in the temple of Athena? Who dwells in the temple of Athena? And the answer is, Athena dwells in the temple of Athena. If you were allowed in the temple, you would walk in and there's this gargantuan, colossal statue of Athena with her shield and with her spear, the guardian goddess of the city. Athena dwells in the temple of Athena. Got it? Okay, let's see. You've made it to the semifinals. In the city of Olympus, where the ancient Olympic Games were born, the runners, the jumpers, the boxers, the wrestlers, the Olympic Games were dedicated to the god Zeus. And in Olympus, before you would go compete in the Olympic Games, you would offer sacrifices at the temple of Zeus. Semifinals. Who dwells in the temple of Zeus? Zeus dwells in the temple. You get the idea, right? We could play on, but you get it. And that was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, that statue. Gold, ivory, unbelievably awe-inspiring. If you were allowed to enter the temple of Zeus, you would find that Zeus dwells in the temple of Zeus. Now, once again, let's look at our verse. It says, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and God's Spirit, what? Dwells among you. Do you understand how strange this would be if you're raised in the Greek and Roman culture? A guy starts hearing about this Jesus group. It's a new religion. He's in the marketplace and he runs into someone he hears is a Jesus follower. And he says, you're part of this new thing. He said, yeah. He says, will you take me to your temple? Yeah, I guess so. Come with me. And you go down a main street and then a side street and another side street. And the guy leads you to a house and you walk in and there's a courtyard. And over in the corner of the courtyard are 3 people and they are praying in the courtyard. And it's a weird combination of people. One is Epaphras, and he is a city councilman. And then you have a woman by the name of Priscilla. She's got calluses because she's a tradeswoman that makes tents. And then there's a servant by the name of Onesimus, and you can tell it's a servant because of his clothes. And the guy stops and says, well, this is it. And you go, this is what? He says, this is the temple. He says, this courtyard, this is the temple? No. Those people, they are the temple. If they stood up and walked out into the street, then the temple would be in the street. Now, if you come from a Greek and Roman perspective, you go, now what? What? And this is the important thing. It's not the space that makes the gathering sacred. It's the gathering that makes the space sacred. I love walking through centuries-old cathedrals. Awe-inspiring, vaulted. It's like you have a holy hush when you walk into one of these great cathedrals. I just need to remember anytime I amble into a beautiful cathedral, I need to remember this. It's not the space that makes the gathering sacred. It's the gathering that makes the space sacred. Jesus would word it this way. Listen to his words. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst. I am there. My spirit is there. Wherever they are, which means that a hospital room, the corner of a Panera Bread store, and a work break room can all be sacred space. Hospital room, 4th floor. It's a dire situation. You don't know which direction this is going to go. Family members are justifiably nervous, scared. This is a point where you circle people up and you just say, let's ask God to be gracious in this situation. You circle up and offer a prayer in room 413. Someone in that circle walks away and later goes, it felt like the presence of God was there. You know why they thought the presence of God was there? Because he was. Sacred space where the Spirit of God hovers and meets his kids. Don't you know that when you gather, you are the temple and the Spirit of God is among you and between you and above you? In the corner of a Panera Bread store, there is a table and there are 4 women who have been working through this material together from 1 Corinthians, culture of the cross. And one woman is stuck and she says, love keeps no record of wrongs. Love, listen, there's something that he did 15 years ago and I can't let it go. And there's silence and there's listening. There's some loving coaching. You're not alone. Let's talk. And that corner of a Panera is holy space. Because it's not the space that makes the gathering holy, it's the gathering that makes the space holy. You work one day and you walk past someone else's computer and there's something sitting beside their computer and you go, I got one of those. 3 or 4 people start meeting in a break room minutes before work starts each day. Just to go, okay, today, love is patient, love is kind. It's Monday, love is patient, love is kind. And someone offers a 1-sentence prayer. Dear God, today, help us be loving and patient. Amen. For customers, for clients, for people you report to, for people that report to you, for coworkers. Love is patient, love is kind, particularly for people that annoy you to no end. And suddenly in that break room for 2 minutes, it's sacred space. It's holy ground. This is the third imagery. This is the third image that Paul uses. You are God's field. You are God's building. You are God's temple. It's this brand new way of envisioning holy space. You just got to remember, this is holy ground. And this is holy ground. And this is holy ground. Right about now, I think that there are probably some believers in Corinth that are nervous if they realize that their attitudes and their behaviors have been destroying the very thing that God is building. If you're involved in one of these altercations, my leader's better than your leader, so my group's better than your group, so I'm better than you. Who's in, who's out, who matters, who doesn't, who counts, who doesn't. If you are involved in a status war in your church, and if suddenly you realize, I could be destroying the very thing that God is building, could I be in trouble? The answer is yes. Now, what's gonna happen next, last verse we're gonna look at is that the Apostle Paul throws down a warning. And he basically goes, be careful how you build, be careful how you build, be careful how you build, because if you're destroying the very thing that God is building, he is not with you. God's power and his presence working actively and positively, don't expect that to show up in arrogant self-centeredness. In fact, anticipate that if you are destroying what God intends to build, he could be against you. You ready for the warning? It's heavy. It's really heavy. And he needed it to be heavy for them to hear what he was saying in clear and unambiguous terms. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, for God's temple is sacred, and you together are that temple. If God is growing his sons and daughters, if God is growing his people, and you're coming in with a sledgehammer and knocking people down, if you are destroying the family that God is building, he says, don't think that God is with you on this. Don't think that he's on your side. The Apostle Paul wasn't the only one to voice this. Jesus, he's got disciples that follow him around for 3 years. One of them, the Apostle Peter, would later write guidance to the Jesus groups as they were getting going. Peter would write this. He would say, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Could you do something with me? Can you read that one out loud? Ready? God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. The word opposes means to be actively against. God gets in my way. He is actively against me. Even when I'm doing the work of Christ, but not in the way of Christ. When I built on this foundation of humility, but I'm building it with angry, resentful, envious, proud, whatever. Peter, right before that, he would say, clothe yourself. It's like taking a coat and putting it on. He says, clothe yourself in humility. Each of you should wear humility, because God opposes the proud and he shows favor to the humble, shows favor to the humble, shows favor to the humble. Remember, down is up, and often the presence and the power of God, the favor of God is unleashed when we come in humbly. 3 images written to a church in crisis, people he loved, but just needed to redirect the way they were doing life and relationships. 3 images: God's field, God's building, God's temple. 3 images: God's field, God's building, God's temple. Say them with me, ready? God's field, God's building, God's temple. I need to leave you with a story. This happened last July. And I heard of this through one of our campus pastors, Kevin Baker. Kevin's a campus pastor at Knapp Street. What happened in July was that we had our middle schoolers doing different service projects around our city with different groups. But they needed to gather in the morning before they took off to the service projects, and they needed to gather in the evening when they were done for these service projects. So their day begins with breakfast and it ends with dinner together. 180 middle schoolers and volunteers. No, not 20, not 30. I just want you to use your glorified imagination for a moment to imagine the mess 180 middle schoolers can make when they descend upon a building for breakfast before they go to their service projects. Now, the gathering place each morning and evening happened to be our Knapp Street campus. Feeding middle schoolers and cleaning up, you can plan for that. Because there are certain things you get to plan for. There are other things you don't get to plan for. Like when someone passes away and a family calls and says, can we have a funeral at your building with your staff this week? Which is what happened twice on back-to-back days, late morning visitations, late morning funerals, and then lunches that were served for the grieving family and their guests. Is anyone seeing an interesting week unfolding at the Knapp Street campus? 180 kids and volunteers descend upon the building. There's setup, there's feeding. Quick, there's cleanup, there's reset the atrium. There's a funeral visitation, then there's a funeral, and then there is a lunch that is served for the guests. And quick, then there is a reset for 180 kids coming back and having dinner. 2 days, and then hit repeat and do that 2 days in a row. And the reason Kevin told me about that story is just because of how incredibly motivating it was just to watch everyone work together. Volunteers showing up to set up for breakfast, middle schoolers hanging out before they went to their service project in order to help move the tables around and put the chairs in different positions. Volunteers coming in that week to serve at funerals, and this was like the last minute, and they were inconvenienced, and they were serving families they had never met. They were serving people they didn't know, and that didn't matter. Staff people at Ada, director of men's ministry, women's ministry, small groups, whatever, staffing doors and greeting guests for the funeral as they came in. At Trent, our director of men's ministry, running out to the funeral home vehicle and schlepping flowers into the auditorium. I'm telling you, when he signed on to direct men's ministry, floral arranging was not on his job description. And it was just this picture of what should be our normal. Just people going, where can I serve? What needs to be done? How can I help? Who's in need? I can't be there that day. I can be there that day. I can't set up, but I can help clean up. I can't clean up, but I can help set up and then take off. If I could capture what Kevin was describing to me, it would just be this picture of humble servanthood. Listen, if this family known as Ada Bible Church gets known for something one day, humble servanthood, I'll take that. That's about as high as we can get because down is up. The power of God and the presence of God is unleashed in these moments when we view ourselves as God's field, God's building, and God's temple where his Spirit lives and moves and empowers. Let me ask you to stand here and at our campuses as well. I'd love to pray for us before we move out into our weeks. And gracious God, we say thank you. We say thank you that we got to be in these spaces today to listen and to learn and to grow. Gracious God, I ask that you would carry us into our weeks, that you would provide courage, that you would provide self-awareness, that you would provide strength for the journey as we continue to learn the way of the cross. We ask this in the name of Jesus, who came here for us. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. We'll see you.